Hey everybody, today is July 28th, and we're here for another daily reflection on our readings and our saints from today. Today we celebrate a really popular saint, especially among those in Greece. Her name is Saint Irene Chrysovalantou. Saint Irene was living in the 800s, and she was brought to Constantinople as a potential wife for the emperor. And instead of becoming his wife, she became a nun. And then through her ascetic disciplines as a nun, she eventually became the abbess of a monastery with the name Chrysovalantou. She was originally from Cappadocia in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. Now, St. Irene also had a moment where a sailor from the island of Patmos brought to her some apples. And he said that these were very special apples because they had been given to him in a vision from St. John, the theologian, who, if you remember, lived out the remainder of his life on the island of Patmos. So today, on the feast of St. Irene Chrysovalantou, the tradition is, if you're having a liturgy in her honor, to also give out apples as part of the blessing at the end of the liturgy. So one time I was at a church service in New York City, and at the end of the liturgy for St. Irene's, we all walked away with a bag of apples, which was really great. And it's a reminder that in the Orthodox Church, we do have a lot of different traditions surrounding food and different blessings that we receive on different feast days. So that is the tradition for St. Irene that we celebrate today. Now, our epistle and our gospel reading come from the book of Acts and from the gospel according to Matthew. And the reading that we have from Acts is specific for today because of several of the saints that we celebrate as our feast for today. So we celebrate some of the first deacons of the Orthodox Church that were chosen by the 12 disciples. And it says in Acts 6, verses 1 through 7, that there was a dispute among two different parts of the church there. And it says the Hellenists and the Hebrews. The Hellenists were the Greek Christians, and the Hebrews were the Jewish Christians. And it says that the Hellenists were complaining that their widows weren't being properly taken care of, just like everyone else's were. So they said, we need more help to make sure that everyone is being served in a proper way. So the 12 disciples and the 70, which is the larger group of disciples and apostles, they sat and they prayed, and they chose 7 different men of good reputation, and they set them apart as what they would be calling deacons or servants. And these deacons would be taking the job of taking care of the widows, taking care of making sure people were fed, and taken care of within the community of the church. And the 12 that they chose were Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicolaus. And several of those we're celebrating today in our saints of the day as well. And it says that the 12 disciples, they laid their hands upon these 7 men and ordained them to deacons. And this is a really wonderful story because it reminds us of the importance of not only bishops and priests, but also the role of deacons in our liturgical life in the Orthodox Church, but also in our work as servants of serving those in need around us. And that's the role of the deacons. A lot of times that kind of work gets given to members of Philoptochos, of different men's groups, or of different community service groups, but traditionally that's the role of the deacon. Now, our next reading is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, and in it, Jesus says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And as what often happens, the disciples were confused, and they're talking amongst each other. What is Jesus talking about? What do you mean, beware of the leaven? We didn't even bring bread. What is he talking about? And Jesus is like, come on, guys. Don't you understand that if we didn't even have bread, that wouldn't be a problem? Because if you've noticed, I have power over these sorts of things too. He says, don't you remember the 4,000 people, or the 5 loaves that fed the 5,000 people, or the 7 loaves that fed the 4,000 people? In other words, if this were really an issue of bread, I would take care of it. We wouldn't have an issue. He says, but this isn't about bread. When I say the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, what I'm saying, Jesus says, is beware of the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And these were the religious teachers of his day that were kind of telling people to do one thing and then living a different way. or they would focus on very minute aspects of Jewish teaching while ignoring other very important parts. And as Jesus is constantly talking about in his preaching and his teaching, is about following the spirit of the law over necessarily always a letter of the law, and following Jesus' example rather than simply just the teachings of some of these religious leaders at his time. So today we're celebrating Saint Irene Chrysovalantou, a abbess, a beautiful woman who was well known in her time in the 800s. We're celebrating some of the deacons and the very first deacons that were set apart by the disciples in the book of Acts. And we hear this teaching of Christ from Matthew about being aware of the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So with all of that, I hope that you have a beautiful Tuesday afternoon and that you continue to grow in your faith, and you join me for the next daily readings on Thursday as we look at our saints of the day. Amen.